all for joining us tonight. I'm actually joining you from my childhood home in Akron, Ohio, and Eastern time zone, so even more night where I am. But we're so glad to have you with us tonight. We have some very special guests. But before we do that, we always begin with a credential to ground ourselves in the work, why we're here. And I'd like to invite Lori Myers, who has recently joined us in the work and has really stepped right up and taken action. And we're so thrilled with the way that she has been working towards justice with us, and also how she has really contributed and provided everything from great notes and to great ideas. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much. ICAR is formed with 960 households. We work in partnership with LA Voice, a multi-faith, multicultural community organization representing 60 diverse churches, synagogues, mosques, and organizations representing about 40,000 Angelinos. As members of LA Voice, we are also members of Pico, California, which is currently organizing in 75% of the state's Senate and Assembly districts, and is comprised of 480 interfaith congregations, schools, and neighborhood institutions representing over 450,000 families. I joined ICAR during the pandemic, having felt very vulnerable and alone during quarantine. Many of us did. I definitely found some very real silver linings in the quiet, and especially the quality time with my kids. This was almost forced upon us. It wasn't an easy time for anyone, but for me as a single mom, when my kids went to their dad and I was completely by myself, it was a confrontational and eye-opening time to get to know myself again and make peace with myself again. I took a hard look around, and while I had a new level of gratitude about good health and family, I wasn't sure my life had turned out the way I wanted it to. I wasn't sure I had done enough in my career or in my community. I started attending ICAR's Tuesday night justice class, educated activist book club meetings, and our Minyan Tzedek meetings, and found this amazing community of activists. People truly dedicated and not just paying attention, being present, listening, learning, reading, and thinking, but actually doing. I learned how our work is interwoven in Torah and how transformative doing mitzvot can be for others and in turn for ourselves. Things are opening back up, and we have choices about what our new normal will look like. This was my motivation: to take a deep dive into a more spiritual life, to ask the hard questions, and to take action within our community. Learning where we can make an actual impact with a real sense of purpose, imbued with our Jewish values and ideals. We learned so much in sharing our stories and working together, and I'm truly honored to now be a part of that. Thank you to everyone.
And thank you. And before we start our Torah study tonight, we also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the situation in Haiti and in Afghanistan. As many of you, I'm sure, saw today, ICAR sent an email that provided some ways that you can help if you're so moved. And with so many people that have lost their homes in those places in recent days, we'll be continuing to hold them in our hearts tonight as we focus on the vulnerable, more close to home. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi David Kasher, who will be leading our Torah tonight.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Just gratified to hear about the connection that we made to the Tuesday night justice study that we were doing before the summer. And in that class was a kind of a way to support and to honor the work that this group has been doing for so long by adding some sense of the grounding for this work in our tradition. And I want to try to do some of that tonight as well. I have 15 minutes here, and to me that doesn't feel like just a few words of Torah. That feels like I can squeeze a little class does like a quick little class into these 15 minutes. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to actually not just make a point or show you a text, but actually to try to make the case that there in this week's Torah reading, we're in the book of Deuteronomy, there's a principle that we see recur again and again, and it's an important principle for us doing this work to have at the forefront of our minds. I'll introduce the principle by way of saying that that there's some question when we reflect on we progressive Jewish community reflect on the work that we're involved in, some question that we might ask and that might be asked of us as to what exactly is what is justice? What are the principles of justice that we are pursuing here? Justice you shall pursue, but what are you pursuing as Jews? Because one answer might be, well, whatever the Torah says, right? And that seems insufficient. It seems like we're thinking about new problems, and we're also identifying as a kind of a progressive Jewish community. So we might give a different answer, which is just, and this is the answer I think communities like ours are often criticized with, which is that we just follow the prevailing whatever the Democratic Party says, or whatever our other leftist friends say. We're just sort of sweeping along with the winds of the zeitgeist. And I think both of those answers feel insufficient. What does it mean to be fully engaged in the problems of our contemporary society, but to do so from a place of rootedness in our tradition? And one of the principles that I think we might put in the forefront of that conversation is the principle of human dignity. Principle of human dignity. And in fact, I think if you ask Rabbi Brous, I've had these conversations with her, and I think this is often a place that she comes back to. How do you know if something is just, if something requires your just action? The answer that I've heard her give often, and that I want us to consider tonight, is that that justice is about the preservation, social justice, that is about the preservation of human dignity. And when human dignity is being violated, that is a situation that calls us to action. So that's a nice thing to say. It's a nice thing for Rabbi Brous to say. The rabbis of the Talmud also speak of the principle of kavod habriot, of human dignity. But is it just a nice thing to say, or does it go all the way back? And I want to make the case tonight that it goes all the way back, and that we can see the principle of human dignity coming up again and again in the laws of the Torah. This week's Torah reading, Parshat Ki Teitzei, is a Torah reading that has more laws than any other reading in the Torah. So there's a catalog that we could pick through, and I want to give you 3 examples tonight, which is, as I said, a little ambitious for just a 15-minute slot here. But I don't want to just make my point. I want you to see how this principle continues to come up again and again in our Torah itself, and to think a little bit about the way that it's framed. So the principle we're looking at tonight is the principle of dignity, of human dignity. And I haven't even defined yet what that means, but let's use these cases, these three cases, to try and understand that. So the first case that I want to look at is one that we very, very rarely talk about, because it's because it's kind of gross. You forget that it's in the Torah at all, but it's basically about digging yourself a latrine, right? So it's like, did you think you're going to get poop Torah tonight? But you are, because that is actually a law in the Torah, that there should be an area for you outside the camp where you may relieve yourself. With your gear, you shall have a spike, and when you're squatted, you shall dig a hole and cover up your excrement, okay? So, oh my gosh, Rabbi, what are you talking about? But first of all, I actually feel like emboldened to bring this kind of Torah to this group, because of the kinds of issues that we think about. We are thinking about who has a bathroom to use. That is a basic question when we start thinking about who has what in our society, and what civic institutions are set up to allow people to perform their most basic human functions. And when we think about going to the bathroom, right, about digging a hole, one of the ways that we do think about that is that we have some privacy so that we can have a little bit of dignity in that moment, so that we're not squatting in front of everybody. Okay, great. So I think that, it's reasonable enough to make the claim that a little privacy while you're going number 2 ensures some human dignity. But okay, so the Torah is concerned with that. But here's what I want to draw your attention to especially, which is that the Torah's concern for something like that is not just, hey, that's gross, or hey, we want some privacy, or hey, don't stare at that person. But actually, even this poop Torah, if I may, is grounded in a theology, because you have to dig this hole, because the eternal your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you. So let your camp be holy. Let God not find anything unseemly among you and turn away from you. Now, why do I want to emphasize this? Because we see a principle of human dignity emerging. We see it expressed in various laws. But what's especially striking in the Torah's formulation of human dignity is that it is an affront to God when a person does not have dignity. Not just I feel bad for them, not just, oh, I can relate, I'd want that myself, but actually in order to honor God, I have to preserve the dignity of this person. Okay, this is like a strange little case. So let's move on from it and see it in application in a broader principle of dignity. And here we're talking about not just the going to the bathroom function, but the whole function of having a house, having a household. We're going to think a little bit about that later tonight. Take a look at the consideration that the Torah gives here to the house that belongs to someone who is economically so much less fortunate to you that they are actually indebted to you. Okay, so the case here, case number 2, is someone who owes you a debt and the rules for collecting that debt, and pay attention to the appearance of the house, the actual house here. We're talking tonight about folks who are experiencing houselessness. So here's someone on the vulnerable end of the housing spectrum. Okay, so here's case number 2. When you make a loan of any sort to your countrymen, you must not enter their house to seize their pledge. Okay, this person owes you money. This person is economically not doing well. And what is the Torah's concern? The Torah worries that you might think it's perfectly okay, since this person owes me some money, to barge into their house and look around for it. And what is their house anyway, this poor person? It's just a shack on the outskirts of the community, something they've just cobbled together. Because this person owes me money, my inclination is to say they don't have a house. They don't have a doorway, a boundary line. Their personal space is violable now because they're economically less in a lower status than I am in this society. So you must respect the house, the home of someone, even when they are economically disadvantaged. But so there you have, again, a principle of dignity, I would say, like expressed in the thinking about collecting loans. But take a look again at the Torah's language here. It's not just because you feel bad for this person and you ought to think about how you could be in their shoes if the tables were turned. No, it will be a merit before the eternal your God. It will be to your merit before the eternal your God. In other words, if you are trying to be in right relationship with God, then you have to respect the dignity of those in your community. Not because you feel bad for them, but because you're trying to be a good servant to God, and you're trying to do that because that'll be good for you. That'll be good for you. Okay, let me give one last case, and this is really the most fully expressed principle of dignity that we find in this week's Parsha. And it's a bit of a, it's a harrowing case because it involves the death penalty, which some of you may strongly disapprove of. The Torah seems to allow for the death penalty. But even as it allows for the death penalty, take a look here at the safeguard that the Torah insists upon when someone is killed for a capital crime. Okay, so here is someone who is guilty of a capital offense and is put to death, and you impale him on a stake. Hanging was one of the ways that they I guess then and now killed people. And so, but here's the law: you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight, but must bury him the same day. Okay, so pretty gruesome territory that we're in, but the actual law is don't leave someone hanging. Don't leave a dead body out there for public display. A lynching, we're familiar with the horror of that kind of public display. So capital punishment, yes, allowed in this system, but not in a way that is a kind of a sign or a display of, look at this body, look at this person that we killed. Okay, that's that at least, you know, death penalty notwithstanding, that's at least a principle I can get behind. But again, I'm thinking about it because of the disgrace that it brings to this person. The disgrace maybe that it brings to me to witness this person. But look at the way that the Torah phrases it. The Torah doesn't want you leaving a dead person out on public display because an affront to God hangs there. An affront to God hangs there. And you shall not defile the land that the eternal your God is giving you to possess. So again, the concern is that God is offended by an affront to human dignity. God is somehow damaged by a disgrace to a human being. But in this case, it's not just that the human being experiences disgrace, has to go to the bathroom out in the open, or has someone barging out into their house. In this case, the affront is the lifeless person themselves. And Rashi is our most famous commentator, and Rashi makes this point in a particularly theologically powerful way, because Rashi says, what does it mean that an affront to God hangs there, this public display of death? Well, it's an affront to God because the human is made in God's image. The human is made in God's image, right? This is the foundational principle behind so much of the justice work that we do. Human beings, says our tradition, are made in God's image, and therefore their very being is inviolable from they could be punished, they can even be killed in this system, but their dignity is inviolable. And when you violate that dignity, you offend, you affront, you disgrace God itself. God itself. And I'll just finish this Rashi before I close, because it's very powerfully put. Rashi says, it's like, here's an example, here's a parable. I'll make you a parable. It may be compared to the case of two twin brothers who very closely resembled one another. One became king and the other was arrested for robbery and was hanged. Whoever saw him on the gallows thought that the king was hanged. In other words, that's Rashi's narrative way of saying, when a person's dignity hangs out there in the public for all to see, disgraced, God is hanging there. God is hanging there, and you have disgraced God's dignity. You have disgraced God's dignity. Now, okay, why is that important? Why is it important to put it in that theological frame? I think I've made the case well enough that human dignity is a central principle of justice in our Torah. And I think you see that that dignity is not framed in the language of compassion or relation or identification, but actually in the language of an affront to God. Why is that important? I think it's important for us to consider because this safeguarding of human dignity is not reliant on our goodwill. It is not dependent on the reservoirs of our compassion. It's not just if we're feeling like recognizing human dignity, or we just experience in front of us that it's just wrong to see this person suffering, right? That's important psychology, but what happens when we don't feel particularly compassionate? Or when the homelessness structure will be in my backyard, when I have some reason to actually not feel so compassionate in this moment. The Torah's message is, it doesn't matter how you're feeling and it doesn't matter how you identify. A disgrace to human dignity is an affront to God, which, believe in God or not, it's a stand-in for the idea that it is a principle, an inviolable principle in the world. And you have to honor that because it is the truth, and because it is the right thing, and because your very standing in the community and in existence itself depends upon it. So you have to do it for yourself, and you have to do it for God, and not just because you feel sorry for this person in front of you. Okay, so that's what a theological conception of human dignity looks like. And I want us to know that and remember that and have that at the forefront of our lips. When people ask us why we're doing this work because we believe in human dignity, and we believe in human dignity, not just because we're modern progressive people, but because our Torah tells us that dignity is grounded in divinity itself. Okay, so hopefully that is useful to the work that we do, and look for it. You'll see it as you survey the laws of the Torah. You'll see this come up again and again and again. It is central, and indeed goes all the way back in our tradition. So with that, I turn over the floor.
Thank you.
Rabbi Kasher, thank you so much. That was powerful Torah. We're so grateful to you for bringing that to us tonight, and what a great reminder and segue into the next part of our program this evening. So it's my great honor to introduce our next speaker. We have the opportunity now to welcome Assemblymember Laura Friedman, who's here with us this evening. Assemblymember Friedman is the representative who serves in the 43rd Assembly District. That includes the cities of Burbank, Glendale, parts of La Cañada and Flint Ridge, as well as certain Los Angeles neighborhoods, including Atwater Village, Los Feliz, East Hollywood, Franklin Hills, and Silver Lake. We've had the opportunity to meet with the Assemblywoman before, and I can tell you that her legislative work has been focused in three primary areas. She's been focused on addressing the housing affordability and homelessness crisis, which we will be discussing with her in greater depth this evening. She's also focused on combating climate change and protecting vulnerable communities. So as you can hear, she shares really most of our core values and interests, and we're grateful for this opportunity to get a chance to talk with you, Assemblymember Friedman, about the work that you're doing in the state legislature, especially around housing and homelessness, which is an issue that we care deeply about and will be focusing on this year in an ongoing fashion, trying to wrap our heads around what we can do as advocates to be a Jewish community that stands up and says, yes, we want to build housing. Yes, we know we need housing for all the people in our communities, and that we need that housing to be located throughout the areas where all of us live, and not just in other parts of our city and state, so that people continue to be segregated. So with that, I'm going to turn over the floor in a minute here to Adam Weitzman, who's going to ask the questions that we wrote collectively. Adam is a member of our steering committee, and also a proud resident, I happen to know, of the 43rd Assembly District. And so Adam, I invite you to please take the floor and start with our questions.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Friedman, for being with us tonight. And yes, I'm a very proud constituent of yours, and we have some questions about your legislative work and also about the Jewish Caucus that we know you're a member of. So I'm just going to dive in if that's all right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So ECAR Community Organizing is supporting SB 679 to create the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, or LACASA, and we want to thank you for your support for that. We're wondering what you think are the prospects for that bill and where the rest of the Jewish Caucus is on it right now.
Thank you, and it was really interesting to hear part of Rabbi Kasher's presentation. So I want to thank him for that, and for all of you for inviting me here today. So I am not the author of that particular bill, although I've asked to be a co-author of the bill, and I certainly have supported it. It's my understanding that the author of the bill, who's in the Senate, is working with Senate leadership on getting the bill, moved through the process. And I certainly would say that this is the time, for you to all voice your support for the bill, to Senate leadership and Senate appropriations, to make sure that the bill gets to the floor. And as far as I know, the Jewish Caucus has not taken a formal position on that bill, but it's something that the author could certainly ask the caucus to support as allies.
Great. Well, we would certainly support a move for the caucus to support it. Thank you for that. So you are the author of AB 1401, I believe. So we're interested in hearing about that, how it'll affect housing development, and how you also plan to address the concerns of some affordable housing advocates that it'll increase gentrification in neighborhoods already experiencing increasing rents and inadequate housing supply.
Thank you. So what 1401 does is it says within a half a mile of high quality transit, which is basically Metrolink stations and certain types of bus rapid transit like the Orange Line, that it would be up to a developer to decide how much parking they wanted to add to a development. And there's several reasons for this. One, putting aside the housing lens for a second, there's environmental reasons why you want to discourage having large amounts of parking near transit. It tends to not make transit work very well. You know, when you're kind of inviting people to drive into areas that are right around train stations, you're defeating the purpose of having people use transit to get to those areas and make those areas to be more walkable and bikeable. And that's one of the reasons why several cities in California have already chosen to adopt this approach. City of San Francisco, Berkeley, San Diego a couple of years ago did this as well. And then some of the people, now it's interestingly, the builders of affordable housing, the people who build 100% affordable housing are firmly in support of this bill because parking adds really an immense amount of cost to housing projects. Each of the spaces that these projects have to provide, it's almost always subterranean parking, range from between $35,000 up to $75,000 per space. That cost tends to be put directly back into the cost that they have to charge in rent. You know, somewhere that money has to be paid for. And the margins are already really thin in developing affordable housing. Now with workforce housing, where you're trying to build non-subsidized, but more affordable housing for ordinary people, when you have no subsidy from the state, every dollar that you put into your development, you have to find a way to recoup. And I have numerous examples of projects across the state where, because of where they're located, for instance, maybe in San Bernardino or Riverside or in the Central Valley, developers know that they can only charge a certain amount for the units because they're in more economically disadvantaged communities. They have walked away from building housing projects because the projects just don't pencil, given the cost of construction, what it costs to build per square foot, cost of entitlements, cost of land, all of that. So everything that we can do to reduce the cost on the developer is really important and can help on these projects that are more on the margins. What San Diego found and other cities found that have done this is that sort of your luxury developers, it doesn't really mean much to them because they build parking anyway. If you're building to sell to rent to the top of the market, you know you have to give those people 2-3 parking spaces. So it doesn't really, it's not something that they really take much advantage of. But for people that are trying to build a more affordable product, it's hugely meaningful. Now in Los Angeles County, we dedicate just for parking in terms of surface space in our cities, the equivalent amount of land of the cities of Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, La Cañada, and Van Nuys, and I think there's one other combined, just of what we've dedicated to parking cars in the city, at grade parking. We use so much land for parking in this country. The estimate is that we dedicate for each car in the country about 1,000 per foot, about 1,000 feet of land for each car in the country. We have only dedicated about 800 square feet for each person in this country for housing. So we have put more real estate towards parking cars than we have towards housing people. That shows us where our priorities are. Now, I know that there are plenty of people out there, particularly young people, senior citizens, that would be fine having one parking space, maybe no parking spaces if they're taking Ubers and Lyft or they can't drive, but we don't allow developers to build that way. In almost every city, we say that for every one bedroom apartment, you have to have 1.5 parking spaces. For every 2, you have to have 2.5 parking spaces. Some cities as much as 3 parking spaces for a 3-bedroom apartment. That means that you don't give people the choice of paying less rent if they don't want to take a car or don't use a car. I would also say that, you know, I was just in San Francisco and saw the automated cars driving around the streets of San Francisco. That is coming. And these investments that we're making now, spending tens of thousands of dollars on building subterranean parking, are going to be stranded assets in 10, 15 years. So there's a lot of environmental reasons why you want to encourage walkable communities near transit. There's a lot of reasons that are about making transit work. And there's a lot of reasons about removing the burden from housing developers to be able to put more money into the apartments and less into the subterranean parking lots. Now, one of the fears of some of the affordable housing advocates is that parking reductions are given sometimes as a way to incentivize affordable units. However, I have been asking the affordable housing community to show me examples where developers have just taken a parking reduction in exchange for affordable units. And so far, they haven't shown me any. What typically happens is developers will take advantage of our density bonus law. So they'll get to put more units into a building, which does add value to them in exchange for having a certain number of those units be affordable by law units that go to low-income residents. To service that increased density in the building, they then ask for a parking reduction, because if they were to continue to add the required amount of parking under code, even those affordable units would no longer pencil for them. So they take the parking reduction as part of density bonus. I haven't seen evidence that they won't want to take the density bonus if the parking isn't part of that. My belief is that that parking reduction is only to service the density, that's what they're actually after. How do I know this? Because this is what I've been told from the developers themselves. And because so far, they've been unable to supply to me any example of someone just taking a parking reduction in exchange for providing an affordable unit without taking that increased density. And I would also argue that adding all of this parking to these transit adjacent housing projects is a harm. It's a harm to the environment. It invites more cars into precisely the kinds of places where we have, as a state, have spent millions and millions, sometimes billions of dollars of investments in high quality transit. And we're leaving that value on the table because we're saying, come live next to a train station, but by the way, here's 2 parking spaces for you. So we're disincentivizing what we really want, which is people who are going to use transit. And that ends up adding more cars into our streets, more congestion, more bad air quality. So when you have something that's a harm, why hold that back as some kind of bargaining chip to get affordable housing? What's interesting, and people that have concerns about this bill are my allies in all my legislation. So it's not like I don't have a lot of respect for these folks, but I also have a pause when someone comes in and says, we don't want the developers to build this parking. We agree with you that the parking in these areas is bad, but we want to make them do it so that they'll then bargain it back in exchange for affordable housing. My answer would be, if we want affordable housing in these areas, pass inclusionary requirements that say if you're going to build in these areas, you have to have 10% affordable units. That's it, regardless of incentive. Many cities have done that. San Francisco has done it. Parts of Los Angeles have done that. Every city is certainly able to have that kind of an inclusionary requirement. But saying that you want to pretend that you want someone to add parking only so you can forgive it later, to me, just isn't good policy.
Thank you for that really thorough answer and for making that connection between the environmental issue and the housing issue for us. Then my next question is sort of broadening it out a little bit to the general lack of housing in the state. So the state, as you know, has fallen short of its housing production goals and its housing needs by hundreds of thousands of units for decades now. So broadly, why do you think it's so hard to get California unstuck from the housing shortage?
So for decades now, California's household population has been growing at a much faster rate than its housing supply. And it's sort of amazing to me that people don't see the connection between homelessness and the lack of housing. They just don't see it, or they don't believe it. And the truth is that our population has grown about 765,000 people since the year 2000, between 2000 and 2018. So in 2 years, we added 765,000 people in LA County, but we only added 184,000 units. So what's going to happen when you have less housing units than you have people? You end up with this giant game of musical chairs. And who's going to end out in the bottom of that? People with less income, people with less means. At our homeless shelter in Glendale, we frequently see people who are working. They're working people who can't afford to pay the rents in our area. And so they're living in their cars, they're couch surfing, they're ending up in shelters at night. And it's not that there are thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of units being vacant. There's some vacant units, as there always are in any city, people who are moving around, buildings that are just built, but it's not like there's these hundreds of thousands of units being kind of held off the market. I hear that from people. I've seen no evidence of that whatsoever. But what we do have is a situation where we have refused to build. I have spent the day today being yelled at by people who say we shouldn't be adding any density. We shouldn't be adding any more homes. People, if they can't afford to live here, they should live somewhere else. or build somewhere like today, just today, I had someone say, why don't they just build in vacant warehouses? You know, to say nothing of the fact that that's not near schools, it's not near parks, you know, but we shouldn't be building in our neighborhoods. It should be somewhere else. So what happens is sometimes the poorer neighborhoods end up adding more, you know, units, but not the wealthier communities. So it's really been a problem because when we in the state try to compel all cities to build their fair share based on our population growth, we are, you know, being told that we are destroying the quality of people's neighborhoods. So it's a really, you know, it's a tough conversation to have with people. And the people who are the most upset, you know, a lot of the single family homeowners. So of course, you know, we all love our single family neighborhoods, but you also can't look past the fact that these same communities were red line communities, you know, where minorities were not allowed to live. They tend to be predominantly white communities, not exclusively, but that's often the case. And they're also the places that have the most services, better access to schools, safe neighborhoods. And of course, it's where people want to live. So how do we find that balance of still allowing for the kind of development that we need to accommodate our parents, our children, people who move to the area for work, working people, you know, people at all income levels. Everyone likes to say, let's add more affordable housing, but middle-class people have a right to housing as well. And they are also being squeezed out of the rental market. They're having to live in San Bernardino, even though they're working in Burbank. So how do we make room for everyone and do it in a way that builds neighborhoods, that adds to our community, that makes those walkable, bikeable communities? And that's something that if you're a smart city, you find ways of doing that through your zoning and upgrading their neighborhoods, adding mixed use housing, adding, you know, adding housing in areas where you have transit, where you have amenities, where you have job centers. But there are still cities that have a tremendous amount of jobs, for instance, that refuse to add any housing. One local city has 100,000 people commuting into that city every day. They go from 100,000 people at night to 200,000 people during the day. And yet they will say, if we add housing and increase traffic. I would say what increased traffic is when you make people commute from Santa Clarita into your city to work. And yet there's a disconnect where people either don't believe it or they don't see it. And they don't want their neighborhoods to change. Our neighborhoods change regardless. We see people living 3, 4 families in each unit, in each house, because there's nowhere else for them to live. So when do we say, yes, we're okay with adding some nicely built, you know, apartment buildings? When is it okay to have an ADU? When is it okay to make your single family house into a duplex? When are we saying yes to all of that instead of constantly saying, no, build it somewhere else. Go build it on contaminated land. Go build it in, you know, a commercial corridor. Yes, we should look at places like that for opportunities, but, you know, we don't have to, it doesn't mean letting new people into our communities doesn't mean destroying our communities either.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We here at ECAR, as Brooke alluded to, are here to say that we do see the connection between housing and homelessness, and also that we want that housing in our neighborhoods. So to the question of building more housing, getting a little bit more specific, what's your take on the impasse? And this goes back a little bit to SB 679. What's your take on the impasse between the state building and construction trade unions and affordable housing developers? And what do you think can be done to solve that?
Yeah, this has been, you know, kind of an interesting issue because, of course, the people who build the houses, you know, their argument is we want a good wage. We want benefits. We don't want to be, you know, we want to be, unions in general are there to support the middle class. You know, my grandparents were active in the labor movement. You know, my grandparents in New York in the 30s and 20s, you know, worked at a time when they were fighting hard with a lot of the Jewish community for labor unions because working people didn't have a voice and they were, you know, abused. And so the unions, you know, understandably want to make sure that the people who build affordable housing don't have to live in affordable housing, that they have middle-class lifestyles. The other side of that is developers, you know, who are trying to build for less money, you know, not so that they can rent necessarily at exorbitant rates, so that they can actually provide middle-class housing. A lot of them say, and affordable housing developers say, the cost of labor is a huge cost. And when I use union labor for my project, you know, it really does drive the cost up. Now, most of our affordable housing projects do use union labor because we already, if they're taking state subsidies, they do have to use prevailing wage workers. But there are, you know, other people who are not taking state subsidies who are also trying to build sort of working class housing. And it's harder for them because they're either using non-union labor where they run into trouble with the building trades, or their price goes up to pay for it. the trades have been in conversations with the legislature for quite a while about having a special rate for residential, or at least for affordable residential. And those talks are ongoing. I'm hopeful that we can work that out, because no one wants to see housing units being built with either unskilled labor or labor that's being paid under the table, labor that's, from companies that are not respecting labor laws and workers' rights, or hiring people kind of in the underground economy. And we do want our skilled and trained workforce to get good wages and to have a good middle-class standard of living. So I support those efforts. And I do think that people that are building infrastructure and housing in our state should have a good middle-class wage with protections for when they retire. I think more of our workforce should have that, not less. One of our problems is that wages have been stagnant and falling. And I do think that labor unions are one of the solutions to that, and making sure that we don't end up with, the sort of 1%, the CEOs making hundreds and hundreds of times more in their wages than the average working person at their company, more money than they can even spend in their life. I mean, there's no public purpose for that. Really, we need to think about a society where, yes, people are rewarded with good wages, but it's not, the people who are the richest getting richer and richer and richer, and everyone else get poorer and poorer and poorer. This is not a giant game of Monopoly, where one person ends up owning all the hotels and everybody else goes bankrupt. That's kind of what's been happening. And, labor unions are a good way of sort of evening that out and giving everybody opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. So what other housing bills are you supporting this session, and why? If you can think of it.
Well, I am supporting a lot of the bills that are out there. There's a bill, SCA 2, that repeals one of the articles of the California Constitution, which I'm a co-author of this bill, that says that in some cases, for the development, construction, or acquisition of publicly funded affordable housing projects, a majority of the voters would have to vote for it. It's a very onerous stipulation to just build affordable housing. So that's something that I'm supporting. AB 816 by David Chu creates the Office of the Housing and Homelessness Inspector General to try to get more accountability for state and local actions to address homelessness, and imposes new requirements on local governments to develop actionable plans to address homelessness. We need to make sure that there's accountability. There's going to be $12 billion, billion with a B, in this year's budget to go towards homelessness. And it's really important that that money really goes to creating units and doesn't go to making people rich, and that all cities bear some of the responsibility for the homeless in their communities, that we don't continue to see smaller cities and wealthy cities offshore their homeless populations into Los Angeles, that we have accountability that they also house people within their communities. So there's a whole slew of housing bills out there. I tend to support most of them. I have worked on ADU legislation in the past, which is a great way to add more, housing stock in our areas in a very low impact way. So certainly have been working on the budget to support as much money going towards housing and homelessness and affordable housing as possible. And as a member of the LA Caucus, housing has been one of our primary focuses. And I will say that the work I do as chair of Transportation Committee also impacts housing, because the one thing that we hear all the time from people when they oppose housing is, I don't want housing in my neighborhood because it's going to increase traffic. We have got to solve our public transportation problem and invest in public transportation in Los Angeles and make it world-class so that we can move people around in a way that's equitable and convenient and safe, so that we can add the housing that we need without these kinds of complaints, without adding more congestion. And that means investing and allowing more transit and more bus rapid transit, so that people on buses move faster than people in single occupancy vehicles. We've got to also promote that and support that when people push back against that, because that's the only way that we're going to get any density in our areas in a way that continues to make our cities livable.
Fantastic.
So there's a nexus between a lot of these issues. Transportation, housing, and climate are all the sides of the same triangular issue. And we can't solve climate if we continue to have 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our cars and our transportation. We've got to start seeing this as all one big solution. If we care about open space and animal habitat, we can't continue to sprawl to say, we're not going to build here. Go build 25,000 units in the Newhall Pass. Go build 150,000 units in the Tejon Ranch. If we want open space, we have to allow for housing density in our urban cores. And it doesn't have to be bad. It can be good. Think about cities that we love. Most of them are more dense than we are, whether it's Paris or Amsterdam or San Francisco or San Jose. You can have at scale density that's you want to be in and you want to live in.
Thank you so much for these answers, for making these connections, and for all the work you're doing. I know we have some more questions from others, so I'm going to turn it back over to Brooke to open it up for questions from the community. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Member.
Fantastic. Thank you again for those answers. I think you're absolutely right, and we share the same convictions about the nexus between housing and environment and climate and transportation. So we've got just time for like 1 or 2 questions, and we've got one in the chat already from Brent, who asked you to respond also to this question, which is, I think, both a moral and a philosophical one. Do you think that NIMBYism is essentially un-Jewish? And we might rephrase that more broadly as a question of what do you think about the sort of morality of NIMBYism?
Well, I think that probably the rabbi could give you a much better answer to that. I certainly can't speak for Jewishness, but I can tell you that I do think that my ethics and my values say that we should be inviting and accommodating of other people, and and making room for people in our communities, all kinds of people, and that we shouldn't think that it's a hardship on us to welcome new people into our community. And if we do it smartly and we do it together, we can do it in a way that's additive to our communities and not a detraction. And that, when we're sort of saying that we support housing in our communities, are we doing it in a way where it's the same kind of place we'd want to live? Are we upgrading people's experiences and upgrading our whole communities? If we provide the people who are the most disadvantaged with an excellent quality of life, it should, that affordable housing project should be the best looking project on the block, not the worst looking. Those kids should have an excellent experience growing up so that they grow up into people who also want to give and who appreciate, who are appreciative of their neighbors and not resentful and angry because they've had to live in, in a bad environment. Interestingly, I saw some amazing studies that looked at affordable housing. And what it said is that when you build affordable housing in really poor neighborhoods, which tends to be what happens, those kids don't escape the cycle of poverty. They end up 2-3 generations out on welfare. But when you build affordable housing in middle class and upper middle class neighborhoods, it only takes 1 generation for those kids to go to college and become just like all their upper middle class neighbors. That's who they grow up with, that's who they associate with. And, you give them those opportunities. And so we should be, when we build affordable housing, we should be building it in our good neighborhoods. That's how we lift all boats.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of the way I look at it.
Appreciate that. I've got a hand up here. Janet, do you want to just take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Thanks. My question's about density. If we start to increase density and have four residential units built on a lot that's small and has a single family home in a neighborhood, for instance, in Culver City, where the school is small, and now you have 4 more people living on the same lot. So you bring more kids to a school. There's not enough room for the kids in the school. There's more cars on the road in the neighborhood. This is a question that's come from my sister who lives in Culver City. Like, what is the point of increasing density in these areas that can't really absorb that increased density?
Well, I don't know, what areas can and can't absorb it. I can tell you, like in the Glendale schools, that they've been suffering from under enrollment, not over enrollment, as people have less kids. So I don't know the particular school district there, but I would say for all of the challenges that density can bring, and I don't think it's appropriate everywhere, certainly, but for all the challenges it can bring, there's also a lot of challenges to saying no to allowing people into your community and saying no, go somewhere else. I mean, where are they going, and what does that create in our community? Are the people who are not allowed to live in these neighborhoods the people who are working in your restaurants, cooking your food, the people who are cleaning the houses? And then where are they living and what does it take for them to get into Culver City to work? Those smaller divided, units are probably going to be more affordable than a big house. And I can tell you in my neighborhood, for instance, in Glendale, we already have 3-4 families living in our houses. We just don't allow them to say that it's 3 or 4 families living in a house. Putting a wall in the middle of a house and putting another front door on it and calling it a duplex, I'm not sure how much that actually changes. In terms of the cars, I agree. I think that we do need much better public transportation as we grow. I mean, we've added 1 million people, more than 1 million people in the past few years. And we are starting to upgrade our public transportation, but saying you people who are working here, go live in Santa Clarita and drive in is going to make your traffic much worse than if they were living in the communities where they were working. That's an absolute fact that's shown over and over again. And I would say look at communities that are denser. Look at Berkeley. Look at some of these areas where they allow these sort of lot splits by right, or they allow duplexes, and ADUs. And these tend to be also areas where they're not over congested necessarily with traffic because they have a robust bus system, they have BART, and they kind of make it work. It's not like if you don't build it, people stop having kids or the kids don't live any longer. It's just that they end up still working in your community and having to drive, an hour and a half to get there. So I know it's easy to say my community can't possibly take any more, but it's really, also, I love my single family neighborhood. I don't want to see anyone else in it. And, I understand that, but we are growing. And if it's not here, it's going to be, sprawl in our open space. And that has huge environmental impacts as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the last question here from Stacy, who asks, how can we as Jewish organizers contribute to the effort of the Jewish Caucus and coordinate our work together better on housing?
Come and talk to the caucus. We do meetings every couple of weeks. It would be great to have you come and just talk to the caucus. We can certainly talk about the bills that we've prioritized. We do a lot of intersectional work with the other ethnic caucuses, but we haven't moved into the housing space. And it would be really interesting for the caucus to start talking more about housing as a Jewish value. And I think having Jewish organizations like yours bring that message to us will empower us to kind of push our advocacy into areas we haven't explored before. So I love the question and would love to work with you on it. And I do think that, the questions about what are the impacts on my community if we have more people come in, they are the reasonable questions people are going to ask. And I think that we all need to work together to find the solution so that we can find a way to address the housing crisis and do it in a way that is additive to our communities and doesn't feel punitive. Right now, we have so much anger towards trying to add housing stock at the very same time where we have hundreds of thousands of people on our streets. If we don't say yes to building housing, anywhere, it's just going to continue to snowball and we're going to continue to have more and more homeless people. So I think that all of us as a community having, honest conversations about this, about what we can do and what we, think we can't do, and do it in a way that's fact driven is super important. And I would love to see the Jewish community start taking a lead in that conversation.
Yeah, so we would love to do that with you and would be excited to be a part of that conversation with you and with the other members of the caucus. So let's make it happen.
And I really love the questions. And, I feel like for me, this is a very familiar and safe space to have this conversation. And I know that these are not easy. I know there's people that are listening to this saying, oh no, this is awful. And, and I think that we do need to have, the conversations about it, kind of as a state, because the emotions around this have become so fever pitched at the very same time when we have people who are truly suffering, who really need us to find resolutions and find answers.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. We thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Looking forward to building a strong partnership.
Same here. Thank you. And I hope to see you all soon. Okay. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you guys. Thank you. That was so great, Adam and Brooke. I'm Brianna. I'm another one of the co-chairs with Adam and Stacy. And we're going to transition now. We're very excited to let you know that for our campaign this year, which we always have a campaign, we always launch it at the High Holy Days. We're going to be doing a campaign on the Torah of home. As you know, ICAR is actually going to provide housing for some part of the homeless population on our site that we bought. But we're also obviously looking to support people all across the state and the city. So with our campaign, we're going to have a lot of programming throughout the year. There's going to be opportunities to learn with the rabbis. There's going to be opportunities to visit homeless places, and lots of education and lots of activism. And as we launch it, we're actually going to be sharing questions for our community. We have cards that we created for the High Holy Days box. And we thought it would be really nice to share those questions with you guys tonight, and hopefully invite you into a little conversation about the kinds of things that we're hoping you guys will talk about with your own friends and family, and sort of get used to talking about this stuff. And hopefully you'll join us fully in the campaign that is to come. I'm going to actually hand it back to Stacy, and she's going to share the questions with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. And I just wanted to say also that, you know, as Brianna said, we're sending cards out to the community, and there's going to be an opportunity for people to respond back to us the same questions that we're asking you tonight. So we wanted to give you guys, you know, as our team member, opportunity to start thinking about this in advance, and to encourage people to respond back, because, you know, organizing is a practice of listening, and we want to hear from our community to hear what their questions are. So our first question to you is sort of a big one, which is, what does home mean to you? And it's interesting for me to ask, because as I said, I am where I grew up, which is no longer my home, but it's still in some ways always my home. But I'd love to hear from you guys tonight. So if you want to, you can speak in the chat. We'd also love to hear from you directly. You know, it's so rare that we get to hear each other's voices these days. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll be calling on you. But yeah, so the question again is, what does home mean to you? And so let's see here. It looks like I just saw a hand up. Oh, but went back down. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Brett, for speaking up, and for your great questions earlier also.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much. This has been it's a really stunning group to be a part of, and I appreciate everyone. I'm really sitting with what's happening in Afghanistan right now. I have colleagues who are struggling to get into the airport to leave the country. My colleague, who's a practitioner and theater depressed like I am, with his wife and 4 children, and they're terrified. And Afghanistan was their home forever. When I went to work with them for 10 days, I stayed with a family, and it felt like home to me. Wherever I go, when there's love and a sense of, I think, hospitality, I think there's a sense of home. So I wanted to connect the concept of home to hospitality, but I'm also really mindful. You know, Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, says that hospitality can also connect us to hostility. And people have an idea that home is a fortress that's protected with walls. And for me, home has to do with breaking down walls and crossing borders and getting out of comfort. So I struggle with the dual nature of like home as private ownership and home as private rights. And I don't want to give up privacy, but I don't want to be told what to do. But I also, I don't know, there's precious privacy in our country, and I feel it's toxic, and yes, as Rabbi says, anti-Jewish. So I don't know. My sense of home has to do with wherever there's spirit and love and hospitality and food, and that's where home is.
That was really beautiful, and I think really connects back to the conversation we were having earlier about the ways that people, you know, think about their homes and their neighborhoods, you know, and sort of encouraging us towards that work of hospitality. I'd like to call on Anita next. Oh, and you're muted.
Thank you. I certainly agree with some of what Brent had to say, and there's a lot of warm feelings that I had when you asked the question. But I also remembered a documentary that I saw by the artist and filmmaker Ai Weiwei called Human Flow. And it's about the extensive, horrific problems around the world when it comes to forced immigration, for leaving one's home. And it affected me deeply. I began to think about one's home, not just as a place of safety, but as a place where you are able to feel your sense of identity. And, we certainly know from the Jewish diaspora that somehow or other people, they found themselves, found a way to use time instead of place as a way to hold on to those values of who they were. But it's not enough. I think after seeing that documentary, what I felt is that it really isn't sufficient, that a house is an extension of who you are, who your family is, and that regardless of what else may be going on around you, what difficulties you have, you've got this place. And when you don't have it, and I've not experienced that, I have to work hard to imagine it. And when I do, I just recognize the significance of having it. It's as basic a need as food and clothing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think what we're hearing in these responses is sort of the gravity of home and the depth of its meaning, which I think ties into the conversations we're having about housing and about those who are unhoused as both a material need, but also our understanding of it as a much, much deeper need also. And thank you for that. Let's see here. I'm looking to see if other people want to join in the conversation. I can also add a second question to the mix, and people are welcome to respond now to either question. The second one is, what do you want to learn about housing and homelessness in our city? And this is one that we're really eager to hear from our community about. I think many of us are very deep in this work. We have meetings once a month, and we've been talking about this issue for so long. I know many of us also read about it, but I still have questions. I'm sure many of you also have questions. And so we would love to hear what they are. And we're very interested. So please encourage people that in the community when they get the card to jump in with this question as well. What do they want to know about housing and homelessness? Because I think that'll help us to guide what program we provide. And it'll be interesting to hear what they have to say. So with that, I don't know, I'm looking to see if somebody wants to jump in. I'm not going to just randomly call on you unless you're on the steering committee, and then maybe I will. Okay. Oh, I just saw Janet had a question. Thank you, Janet.
I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of people are wondering what happened to all the money that was raised through, why isn't there more housing being built in the city of Los Angeles and LA County? And I don't know as much as you guys, so I'm hoping someone on the steering committee can tell us what's being done, and are there units in progress and they just are about to be finished, or what is it? Because I know there's a lot in my neighborhood that the NIMBYs are fighting, so I'm just wondering what's going on. Maybe others have the same question for their neighborhood.
Yeah, I've seen in the San Fernando Valley, there's an area near some storage units where a lot of those like small tent areas have opened up, and they seem really organized, and there's some security, and it looks like the little tents have just enough room like for a cot, and it's a very small space. But I'm just like wondering where that money came from and who's organizing that, and the security, like how's that being managed? So I have that question too. Was that money that was earmarked a long time ago, and we're finally seeing that to fruition? And how many people are in there, and why can't we duplicate that someplace else?
I see Miriam waving a hand. Casey, I don't know.
Sorry, it's hard for me to see all the hands. If you guys see the
Yeah,
raised hand
I'll
function at
help
the
out.
bottom, that's helpful too.
Oh, hit unmute, Miriam. Unmute.
I'm unmuted. So
We
I
gotcha.
kept reading about all these amazing new ways of building. You know, everything from on a 3D printer to what I saw in Europe, which is containers, you know, shipping containers transformed into charming homes. And over again, you know, reports keep coming out about these wonderful ways of building quickly and cheaply and non-traditionally. I see that everywhere except in Los Angeles. Every time we talk about a building, they've been building buildings on Pico, they've taken forever to complete. And I'm trying to put together why it is that in this relatively advanced city, we still are building buildings as we did, you know, 25 years ago, instead of taking advantage of new technologies, which would enable cheaper, faster buildings. I don't understand. And I don't understand what's stopping the new technologies from being drawn upon in a city that otherwise likes to think of itself as futuristic.
I think, yeah, these are all great questions, and it's interesting to hear. You know, there's a lot of questions I hear about process, about what's being built, why and how, and this is really great to know. I think that these are. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about this on the steering committee also, and I think that this is something we can definitely work on finding answers, having conversations about. So thank you for bringing these questions up. Looking to see. Sorry, I'm just trying to scan through to see are people raising hands or. Oh, and I see in the chat, Lori added the question about converting parking lots into housing structures if we're moving away from cars, which I think great ties back into the previous discussion about parking, which is great. So thank you all for that, and also just looking to see last chances. So I think we're going to then with that move on to our conclusion here with, I think Brianna is going to be leading us into our next steps.
Guys, that was really cool. Thank you all for, you know, jumping in and participating and sharing some questions. I think this is something that it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and we're going to take those questions back with us and grapple with them as we continue. A couple things. First of all, I wanted to thank Rabbi Kasher, and I think Assembly Member Friedman is gone, but we really appreciate the Torah, and it's very inspiring anytime we can learn from you. And I also wanted to welcome our newest rabbi, Morris Penitz, Rabbi Penitz. I don't know how to pronounce it, but welcome to you, and thank you so much for being here. And also Andrea Vokos, our new lead organizer with LA Voice. It's great to have you back here, and all of us and all, you know, the whole steering committee and everybody is here to support this work and support you guys. And we invite you to reach out to us anytime. We have a couple of next steps for you guys. First of all, ICAR is a 100% voting community. We committed to that a long time ago. And so we just want to remind you guys, there is an election coming up. It's September 14th. Most of you probably already have ballots. You can start voting, and we just want to make sure you vote before the 14th. It's a special election just in California. We're also gonna, we also want to let you know that the Green Action Team on August 26th, they're actually doing what would you call it? A protest, an action at Senator Feinstein's office. Brooke, do you want to clarify?
5 p.m. on the 26th, Green Action, in partnership with Dayenu and several Jewish communities and congregations across the area and across the country, Our gathering in front of senators' offices will be in front of Senator Feinstein's office to blow shofar and to demand a bold climate legislation that gets passed through the Senate. Would love for all of you to be there and join us. Bring a shofar or something that makes loud noises and a sign about the climate, and come show up with us. It's in Westwood, 5 p.m.
Again, the date, please,
August 26th,
and the time.
5 p.m. Brianna, back to you.
I think we lost her, Brooke.
Oh dear. Well, I don't have the rest of the next steps in front of me. We just got through a couple of them. Yes, thank you. That's when the event is. Stacy or Adam, you don't have more next steps that I'm forgetting about right now, do you?
The one that we should probably note is we will not be meeting in September because it is Sukkot and the high holidays, and we don't usually meet the month of the high holidays. And everybody vote in the special election.
Yeah, but we will be doing lots of learning, deep dive learning about housing and homelessness to try to answer some of these many questions that we're raising and figure out what we can do together to become advocates for building the housing that we all know we need. Oh, good, Brianna's back. Oh, she was for a second. There she is.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, my computer died. It does that when I unplug it now. I think I need a new one. The very last thing I was going to say is that we are, in lieu of our September meeting, we'll be having some programming around housing. We're going to have a panel with rabbis that we hope will be right around Sukkot. We're not 100% sure of the date yet, but there's not going to be a regular September 3rd Tuesday of the month organizing meeting. And I believe that is it. So thank you all for being here. Keep checking your emails. We will keep you informed. And oh, there's a last comment question. Brent, please. You're
So
muted.
sorry, just really quickly, because of the urgency, if anyone gets a chance to contact their local representative and appeal for them to ask President Biden to expand access for Afghans trying to leave the country. There's some maybe 80,000 who have been supportive of human rights who are at risk of, whose lives are at risk now. So the US can expand access to getting them out there, but the pressure needs to be on. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and Brent, thank you for that, Brent. And we posted a link from Hyas that makes it easy for people to have a script and make that call. So please do that. It went out in the email yesterday and up on Facebook as well. Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you all for being here. And we will see you one way or another very soon. Wishing you a good month of Elul and more learning to come.